Welcome to Outfest, everyone. And joining me today is the incredible director of the 20th century, Matthew Rankin. And just saying that, the director of the 20th century, makes me want to ask, did you just name the film this so people would say that all the time, that you're the director of the 20th century?
Yeah, that might have been some kind of, subconscious hubris on my part. It is not the most modest of titles. But no, it was not consciously Napoleonic, no.
Where did it come from? Why did you make that decision?
Yeah, I think it kind of emerged. I'm really interested in failed utopias, and I was learning a lot about early utopian movements, like at the end of the 19th century, beginning of the 20th. I started to learn Esperanto. My friend Sam Green made this incredible movie about Esperanto and really got me fascinated by Esperanto, and I started learning it and went to an Esperanto World Congress. And it's one of these kind of really amazing, kind of really beautiful, sad relics of early 20th century hope about the future, right? And how we really had the power as humans to overcome all of our problems, and technology was going to be, a help to us, and we could figure this all out, and we could be like, internationalists, and we could understand each other and love each other and take care of each other and be, in absolute interhuman solidarity. And I feel like now we sort of live kind of in the opposite end of that spectrum. We've kind of reached this point where we feel like the future is deeply cursed, and our capacity to exert any kind of power over it is completely nihilistic, and there's a deep malaise is kind of set in. And I feel like that's kind of the measure of the 20th century, right? So the film is kind of working on themes of that sort. So it's kind of riffing off that.
That's a great explanation for sure. And yeah, I love your thoughts about utopianism. I just finished writing a piece about Bowie and utopia. So I was reading probably a lot of the same things that you were reading, doing my historical research on utopias. And you get into it and you're like, yeah, why can't that happen? And then you see all the different ways that they fail, right?
Yeah, that's right. That's the thing about the Esperanto people, is that they live with very deep disappointment, but they still believe that this thing should work, Anyway, it's hard. It's hard to be an idealist now. It's really hard to summon that capacity, because we live with a lot of irony, So.
Yeah, definitely. So what was it like for you? This is your first feature.
Yeah.
And what was it like making the leap? I mean, it's a glorious sort of bold leap, and a very bold leap, and with everything that you did within the film. So what was that like, that shift from making shorts to making a feature film for you?
Yeah, I would describe it really as an athletic shift. And it just sort of required, a very deep and extended, amount of energy. But otherwise, it was kind of the same. All of the films I make, even the shorts, I mean, I really like the epic form. So I like things to be kind of like sprawling and overwhelming and excessive and maximalist, So the shorts I kind of made leading up to that, they were sort of working towards this. They were all studio pieces, like they were all shot in studios. And they involved a lot of images that were like hard to make, like really, really difficult. But that's sort of what I like the most in making a film, is that, I like to feel that I don't entirely know what I'm doing. And I just find that really energizes me, and I like that. I like it to be kind of a fight, and I like it to be sort of like willfully relaunching the Hindenburg, where, with retro historical knowledge that it will probably be a disaster, you know. So it's kind of like this, and I really like that. I find that really energizes me. It gives me a lot of energy. But so you know, I was going into it with like you know, a toolkit, but it was also there was also stuff I didn't know how it was going to work, and you know, and it was a real fight. There wasn't one image that was easy. It was really like every image was hard to make.
Is there one that stands out that you're just like, oh my God, I can't even believe that I made that happen after everything that happened?
Yeah, well, I would say probably the final sequence is in like you know, this labyrinth of mirrors, and this was just me trying to make things as difficult as possible for everybody. Me, the camera person, the actors. It's like you know, I really feel like I could film almost anything now, having shot in so many mirrors. There's so many traps that you would never even imagine. It also involves a lot of math, which I'm really bad at. So yeah, I would say that the math and physics involved in shooting in a mirror labyrinth, that kind of takes the cake, I would say, which I don't plan on ever doing again.
Well, now you've got it down. You could shoot a whole film in a mirror.
Yeah, that's right. That's it. Now it's a dubious knowledge that knowledge of dubious value that I've accumulated. You know, it's sort of like, I don't know, playing the spoons really well or something. I don't know. Yeah, it's true. Maybe there will be use for it at some point.
Yeah, maybe. So, you know, for me, when I first saw the film, I was just, that's amazing. And I also just thought, I felt like I had stepped into someone's dream, maybe your dream. And it has this wild dreamlike quality to it. And so I'm just wondering if you can tell us a little bit about your inspiration to make this film and make it the way that you did, and also about, you know, this particular take on Canadian history, and why William Mackenzie King, who I just did my research on him this week, and I'm fascinated even more. As an American, I'm just like, wow, okay, but why did you choose him? So I know there's a lot in that, but I'm just wondering, like, what was the inspiration and
Yeah,
you know, for this sort of historical film, and why him?
sure. Yeah. Well, yeah, I would answer in two parts. One is I mean, part of the movie is a little bit of a critique of how we make historical films typically. I remember I had a professor in university who devoted an entire lecture to Leonardo DiCaprio's teeth in Titanic. And she said, there's just no chance that in 1912, someone who's that poor would have such beautiful teeth. There's just no way that that's possible, right? And that is a movie that, you know, it aspires to be historically credible, right? But that was a detail that perhaps James Cameron was aware of this and decided, well, that's fine, but he's going to have nice teeth in my movie. or he didn't think about it and it was a thing he missed or whatever. But the fact of the matter is, whenever you translate a historical incident or, you know, historical material, historical phenomena into a film, there is a fictional process at work. And I think a lot of times we lose sight of that because cinema has such a power to be realistic and you know, credible and immersive. And so I really wanted to make a film that, you know, no one would ever think that it was, well, people would doubt it, actually. People would know that it's a fiction, but they would ask themselves, well, what of this is true and what of it is false? And I think that's actually kind of a good question for people to ask when they watch a historical film. And Mackenzie King sort of lent himself to precisely this conceit because he left a diary. The entire film is based on his diary. And I myself, I'm a compulsive diarist. I've kept a diary, you know, obsessively since I was very young. And anyone who keeps a diary knows that it's kind of what I would describe as a parallel consciousness. Yes, it is sort of a historical record of a sort, but it's a deeply, deeply subjective one. so much so that it's almost like a waking dream. Like it's, and then when you reread your diary and you see things that you wrote, I mean, you can have very strange reactions. You can be a measure of, I don't know, how much you've evolved, or it can fill you with almost like a physiological experience of shame, or you can see yourself, in a state of ludicrous, melodramatic outpouring. But none of these things are necessarily grounded in any kind of factual, chronological, empirical order. They are not an authoritative account. They are your raw experience of your passage through time. And that's sort of what this document was, this very, very fascinating diary that he left. And so I started to think of it as, I started to see, this movie through the prism of the diary. And I described the film not so much as it is a little bit of a biopic in a way, but I think of it more as like a nightmare Mackenzie King might have had in 1899. Because like a nightmare, it is his life. Every character in the film did exist. All of the events in the film did, in a way, happen. But they're reprocessed through this kind of oniric prism. And that's kind of really what we do when we keep a diary too, I think. It's a processing of chaos through this very, very subjective lens. And a dream is, that much more ecstatic and that much deeper into our subconscious, but it's really the same kind of processing of chaos, processing of feelings, processing of abstraction. So that's sort of answering almost all of your questions. The third thing I would add is that I just personally was attracted to Mackenzie King. Particularly his kind of worst qualities. I saw just a lot of myself in his kind of worst expression, and I found that kind of weirdly sort of interesting. So I sort of followed that. And also, of course, I saw him as an opportunity to make fun of Canada, which is a lifelong vocation in and of itself.
Seems to be, yeah. It's really interesting what you say about the diaries. I don't keep a diary because I am in fear somebody would find it and do something with it and read it.
Yeah.
So I've never kept one because I don't want all those things in my head to ever be out there. And I did peek into his because I was fascinated by the spiritualism part.
Yeah, that's right. He was a ectoplasm enthusiast.
Yeah, which is fascinating and wild. I mean, as a leader as he was, so it was really, really interesting. And I love films that drive me to go do research, about what the hell just happened.
There's always a few people checking Wikipedia in every screening I've gone to.
Oh yeah.
A little glow of Wikipedia comes on and off.
So you just mentioned these two things when you were talking about this, and they were shame and melodrama.
Yeah.
And they play a major role in the film and the aesthetics of the film and what the film's about. And so can you talk a little bit about why these are key elements within this piece of work for you, and how you think that those things might relate to the queerness of the film, if at all?
That's interesting.
Yeah,
it is interesting. The film is queer sort of in the way that Joan Crawford films are queer, they're not sort of overtly queer, but definitely the subtext it's sort of deep in the subtext. Autumn Leaves by Joan, I think of it as Joan. I think of Joan Crawford as the author of that film. I mean, it's Robert Aldrich directed it, but really it's Joan Crawford who is the author fundamentally, I think. Autumn Leaves was a huge impact on this movie, and I would say Scarlet Empress. I don't know. That's a great question. I think, the melodrama, I would say, more emphatically comes out of the diary itself, and that was something that I really related to watching or reading Mackenzie King's diary, was how melodramatic it was. It reminded me so much of my own diary, and I feel like that is melodrama is in fact a way that we do express ourselves as humans. It's a maligned form to a certain extent, but there are certain, I don't know, how shall I say, extreme expressions of self that can really only be mediated through melodrama. And the diary is by its nature part of that form. So and then I don't know, the queerness of the movie kind of it emerged very, very organically. It was not something that I really thought about a lot. And I love how it's been remarked upon, like the sort of intergender casting is something that people point to quite a bit. And again, this was something that I did not really think about too, I don't know, in too great detail. That just struck me as completely normal. And when I was doing my casting, I cast very broadly. Everyone was welcome to audition. I really wanted to just choose the right person for the role, and sort of capture the spiritual essence I was after. Sort of, however people, present gender-wise, it didn't really matter to, it was about the spirit. Kind of like in a school play. I feel like in a school play, there's a lot more kind of liberty and fluidity that, at least the school plays I remember being a part of.
A lot about opera.
Yeah, that's right.
Opera and the melodrama and the people playing different roles. It felt very operatic to me.
Yeah, it is. That's right. So I did the casting really just, I was just casting people, and then. But then it occurred to me as I was sort of going along that was actually kind of really great, because the film does sort of play with structures that we create. Its surface text is very much about this nation building project, which is presented as something very artificial. The theatrical sets are there as a constant reminder. I wanted the viewer to be constantly confronted by the idea that the structure, this project of nationhood, is being artificially grafted upon the earth, and it's not. There's nothing organic about it. It is a fantasy, and it is a structure, and it is something that has been invented, right? And so I feel like in a lot of respects that's that's incarnated in many other elements of the film, and I think the intergender casting kind of does that too. I mean, structures can be there to create, they can be sources of great joy, they can be sources of great power, they can emancipate us, they can bring us forward, they can bring us together. But they can also, on the other end of the spectrum, structures that we invent can also tyrannize us, they can also oppress us, they can also not serve us well. And so I think of the film as kind of a gender fluid movie, and it kind of undermines these sort of rigid structures that we typically turn to when we're kind of watching a movie and reading it, and hopefully questioning the value of these structures, and how well do they really serve us, in the end. Is that answering your question? I'm not really sure.
I know you did. That was fantastic, and I loved it. And I like, that all these things weren't planned. You weren't like, this is planned queerness. It just sort of.
Yeah. That's right. It became very organically queer, which is really fun. I didn't really think about it too much. It's sort of, it's really just, as the film has gone out into the world, that's something that people have remarked upon, which I'm really excited about. I really love that. I love that people see that. But yeah, it was not. It was not a scheme. It was just something that emerged.
And it sort of speaks to the expansiveness of queerness and what that actually is and means in cinema today too, and the evolution of it. So.
Yeah, for sure.
I appreciate it as an experimental film programmer. Cool. Thank you for making it. So, sort of segueing into the aesthetics of the film, in and of itself. I mean, it is visually stunning and quirky. I love the Super 8 and the 16. And can we talk a little bit more about the aesthetics? And I'm wondering, are there other artworks outside of film that inspired your filmmaking in this way,
Yeah,
specifically? And if there's other films as well, but I mean, you just talked about Joan Crawford a little bit.
sure. Yeah, yeah. Yes, there's quite a lot. I would say, um, yeah, broadly speaking, I was really inspired by like what the masters of artifice. Like I think of there's a tradition of Canadian landscape art, which is referenced quite heavily in the film. If you know the paintings of Emily Carr, Lauren Harris, and the painting and sort of installation work of York Wilson, it's all it's all this very geometric, almost architectural depiction of the natural world, as if almost it's human made, but it's depicting trees and mountains, and and so I was kind of this big inspiration of those three artists, and I would also say Robert Wilson, the dramaturge, and Lotte Reiniger, the German animator, was a big inspiration on the animated sequences. I built a sort of very primitive Lotte Reiniger 3 planes of glass animation stand, and her stand was very sophisticated with hydraulic levers. Mine was made out of plywood and plexiglass, but yeah. So I feel like cumulatively, and then of course there's other filmmakers I can name. Fellini is sort of a big influence on the film, and yeah, again, I would say Joseph von Sternberg and Joan Crawford, big ectoplasm hanging over the movie. But I would say, broadly speaking, it's masters of artifice. Like there's typically when we make a film, we're trying to capture reality in a way, right? We're trying to make it credible so that the audience does not notice that it's fake. You want to make it as real as possible for the audience, so they never snap out of it, or But this is kind of the opposite approach, and there's a sort of parallel tradition in film, which takes the opposite approach, where the idea is to make an aesthetic virtue out of how fake filmmaking is, right? And how it is artificial, how it is just a representation, how it does present, and how that's constructed and so forth. So that again was part of the conceit of the movie, to sort of depict a world that is completely invented, that has no kind of organic basis, and of course that no one would ever watch and think, oh well, that's what happened. That must be historically accurate, right? So yeah, so it's the set was, but I mean, I would say fundamentally the primary reason the design is as it is I would say first and foremost because of my budget. If I were to even try or even think about trying to make some sort of Spielbergian glossy period piece, my budget would have collapsed within the first morning of the shoot. But I knew that if I was to embrace artifice and really make an aesthetic virtue out of it, then my budget would go much further. And so it was the kind of combo of budgetary constraint with thematic conceit, and those really working together that sort of made me go down this path.
It's fantastic. I love the idea of the aesthetic virtue of artifice. That's what quote you'll be known for. It's really good. So I guess I've been to Winnipeg once.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Yep. We get to go to really cool places like that as academics for conferences.
That's great. Yes.
And I had a difficult time, obviously, as somebody that was traveling there, sort of finding the creative, weirder spaces that might be there in the city. So can you tell me about if they're there, and or where you find the crew and the people to get behind a crazy experimental movie like this?
Yeah, well, it's my friend, the filmmaker Trevor Anderson, who plays the judge in the movie, has this great line about Edmonton, where he's from, where he says, the old line about how, well, it's a nice place to visit, but I wouldn't want to live there, right? But Winnipeg is kind of the opposite. It's like, it's a nice place to live, but I wouldn't want to visit. Something like this, I think, to someone sort of entering Winnipeg without knowing much about it, or knowing anyone there, it is sort of full of emptiness, and it's cold, and it's somewhat removed from the North American mainstream. But it's true that it has a film culture which is very coherent. I do really think of Winnipeg filmmaking as kind of a national cinema, in the sense that there is kind of an ecosystem of formalisms and thematic obsessions, and sort of narrative preoccupations that unite a whole group of filmmakers. Obviously, Guy Maddin's the most well known, and I love his films deeply. He's a huge influence on me. And I would say also, I would add to that, John Pays made this incredible film called Crime Wave, which I love. Shauna Dempsey, Laurie Milan, my friend Mike Marinock, Solomon Nagler. There's a whole consortium, and if you know the films of Guy Maddin, you will see how this community operates, right? It's there's a lot really at work, and I don't know. I mean, it's I don't really know exactly why that exists. I know that Winnipeg is somewhat removed from the mainstream, but it had this strange countercultural American films really had a big purchase upon the Winnipeg people for reasons I cannot explain. Like the films of the Kuchar brothers were like very popular in Winnipeg. John Waters had a huge purchase on Winnipeg people. The very bizarre film by Brian De Palma called The Phantom of the Paradise. Mm-hmm. Do you know that? Yeah, it's a deeply strange film which completely failed throughout North America, except in Winnipeg, where it played for something like 5 years. Like, the Winnipeg people couldn't stop watching it. It's really bizarre. So I don't really know why that is, but it's a city that is somewhat removed from the North American stream and has a certain degree that has created a certain amount of tension. There's like these, there's a certain type of Winnipegger that is really, kind of embittered about this and wants, economic development, and, Winnipeg is just as good as any other place. And, it's perfectly fit for mass tourism and, the Olympics and all these money makers, right? But then there's this kind of parallel Winnipeg that completely rejects all that is completely anti-establishment and is just reveling in its own weirdness. And all of the great Winnipeg culture that I can name all has emerged from that kind of strain of Winnipeg's being. So, it's just, it's definitely a place where a film like this is very much understood, and there's a shorthand at work. That's my, I don't know. Other than that, I don't know. I can't. There is a mystery. There's a great intangible in there somewhere.
So I just have a couple more questions.
Great.
And one of them is, and maybe you want to leave this unanswered, and that's fine, but what do you hope people walk away from your film thinking or feeling after they see it? Like, what do you hope? I know artists don't want to tell people that, but was there a hope when you created this that it was going to impact people in a certain way?
Yeah, I mean, there's many readings that the film can provoke. I've watched it with audiences that were very, very attentive to all of its viscera. So, the humor in the film, its absurdity, its gore, its sex, this kind of stuff. And then there have been other audiences that have been much more focused on kind of the ideas that are driving it. And both are, of course, great. As I'm happy to support both. I do think that like it's a film that I don't really think of it as a political film, but it is a movie that is sort of um, preoccupied with questions of leadership, political leadership, and what this can mean, um, and you know um, how political phenomena, political action can summon at times, and this is very difficult, but it can sometimes there are these moments where it can really summon the very best expression of a very large population of people. And then there are other times where it does the exact opposite. This is the easiest way to lead, I think, is to lead by the very worst impulse in people. And then there,
Right, don't we?
but then there's something else, and it's straight down the middle. Mackenzie King, the synthesis I would make of his life and career would be that you walk this very, very fine line, this very, very cautious line between utopia and total Armageddon. And and I feel like the center is becoming a really strange space in politics right now. I feel like we're kind of like stretching this elastic kind of to its snapping point, and it just makes me think about the center, because and what does it mean? Is there a value to the center or not? Like I think generously we could think of the center as a space that is democratic, right? It's like I understand that in democracy there are many different points of view, and let's find a common ground. We'll find, you'll give up something, and we'll meet here. So that would be a generous thought about the center. But I think also the center, and I think this is particularly true of Mackenzie King, the center for him was a much more opportunistic space. It was about protecting his political power, really at the expense of his own understanding of what was right. Even there was many moments in his career where he had to choose between protecting his political power and doing what he knew was right, and he always chose to protect his power. And I think the center allows that to a certain degree, and it can allow a certain insidiousness to fester, and it can even be a space of destruction, right? So the film is not drawing any vast conclusions about that, but it is or any pointed conclusions about it, but it is a film that is kind of preoccupied and sort of preoccupied with that idea and kind of working through it. So my hope is that people walk away with what they walk away with, but that is certainly that's sort of that's kind of the idea that has been driving it. And when I find that when audiences engage with the thematic particles beneath the viscera, the cerebra rather than the viscera, that's usually what they focus on.
It's amazing, and I love that there are both levels to the film. That it's not relying on one or the other either.
Yeah, I sort of like movies that have both cerebra and viscera in them. Yeah, if it's all cerebra, I go to sleep, or if it's all viscera, I just tune out. So.
Absolutely. Well, so final questions. What's next for you? What are you what are you working on? Or are you just sort of taking a break and writing in your diaries?
Yes. Well, I did have a long COVID nap,
Yeah.
which I'm actually kind of really thankful for. COVID is so full of so many strange dualities, right? But yeah, I'm bizarrely developing a kids show, if you can believe that. And
actually, I'm
kind of
really excited to hear that.
Yeah. So I'm working on that, and then I have like a couple other films, scripts that I've written, which are coming down the line. And of course, that's all we can do right now is write. So I'll keep writing more things.
Yeah, and practice shooting in mirrors in your bathroom. I guess you can do that too.
Yeah. Become more eloquent in Esperanto. This kind of stuff.
Well, thank you so much for joining me here in this virtual Outfest world right
It was
now.
wonderful. Yeah.
Really appreciate you being here, Matthew, and your film is just spectacular. When I saw it, I was just like, okay, done. Like there was no question about it being in the festival. It's like, we have to have this.
Oh,
Um,
thanks
and
so much.
oh, of course, of course. Thank you. I'm excited to see what you keep making. So again, everybody, this is Matthew Rankin, the director of the 20th Century. I'm Tiffany Naiman, the Platinum Programmer at Outfest, and I hope you all enjoy the rest of the festival.